This is the story of a portrait, an innocent question from a royal child, and the exact moment Queen Camilla realized her crown does not grant her absolute power. In less than 48 hours, the carefully constructed illusion of Camilla's untouchable authority within the royal family was quietly and ruthlessly dismantled. What Queen Camilla just realized behind closed doors is that a title is merely a constitutional courtesy. But true institutional power is forged in bloodline public loyalty and silent administrative control. Over the next few minutes, we are going to unpack the secret power grab she recently attempted, how a young Princess Charlotte inadvertently exposed the scheme, the freezing institutional retaliation from Catherine, and Camilla's devastating realization that despite sitting on the throne, she actually owns nothing. To understand why this specific internal clash reached a boiling point, we must first look at the immediate pressure cooker of the last 48 hours. Camilla's grip on the royal narrative has been unraveling in real time, creating an environment of deep paranoia and reactionary anger. Just days ago, while King Charles and Camilla were attempting to project sovereign unity on an official trip to Northern Ireland, their carefully managed public relations cycle was deliberately hijacked. Meghan and Harry released previously unseen wedding photographs on social media, effectively stealing the global spotlight and infuriating palace officials who view this as a repeated calculated pattern of overshadowing the king. But the external threats did not stop with the Sussexes. In a staggering coincidence of timing, a rare 1981 honeymoon letter written by Princess Diana, alongside newly unearthed secret audio tapes detailing her absolute despair over Camilla's presence in her marriage, have suddenly surfaced for auction this week. The ghosts of the past are loudly dominating the present. Camilla is currently surrounded by relentless reminders of Diana. Her communications team is failing to control the Sussexes' media maneuvers, and her internal frustration is palpable. Because the external narrative was slipping from her grasp, Camilla attempted to assert her dominance internally, and she chose to do it by executing an act of silent institutional erasure. We must step back and recognize the staggering 30-year manipulation that brought Camilla to this point, in order to understand why her sudden fall hits with such devastating force. For 3 decades, she played the longest, most meticulous game of reputational rehabilitation in modern history. She survived the bitter fallout of the 1990s. She orchestrated a slow, methodical integration into the royal fold. She pushed to elevate her own non-royal children into the periphery of the crown's glow. And she systematically worked to soften the public memory of her role in Diana's tragedy. Camilla operated under the fundamental belief that she had Charles completely controlled, and for a long time she did. When she was officially crowned queen, dropping the consort caveat entirely, she believed she had finally won. She believed that the title was an impenetrable shield. She thought that having her own family members hold the canopy over her during the coronation signaled a permanent shift in the royal hierarchy. She felt entirely untouchable, operating under the illusion of absolute power. But the fatal flaw in Camilla's architecture of power is that it is entirely dependent on a single man's heartbeat. She built an empire on borrowed land. That borrowed land became the battleground this week. The trigger for this crisis was not a public scandal, but a quiet, insidious administrative maneuver. Inside the private quarters of the royal residences, there are specific galleries and corridors dedicated to the family's internal history. These spaces are deeply personal, shielded from the public eye, and heavily curated. What appears to be true, according to internal palace leaks, is that Camilla authorized the removal of a prominent, historically significant portrait of Diana, Princess of Wales, from a key private viewing area. The painting was allegedly relegated to a storage facility, disguised under the administrative excuse of curatorial rotation and gallery maintenance. This is the weaponization of administrative protocol. Camilla did not order the portrait burned. She simply used her authority to have it quietly erased from the daily visual landscape of the palace. It was a psychological test. She wanted to see if she could rewrite the family's internal memory without anyone daring to challenge her authority. She assumed the staff would comply in silence, and that William and Catherine would simply absorb the insult to keep the peace. She underestimated the observant nature of the next generation. The discovery of this secret plan did not come from a senior courtier or a leaked memo. It came from Princess Charlotte while walking through the private corridors. The young royal noticed the empty space, or rather the sudden absence of her grandmother's image. Charlotte, possessing the sharp intuition of her mother and the directness of her great-grandmother, asked a simple, innocent question about where the painting of Granny Diana had gone. That single question shattered the quiet complicity of the palace staff. Word of the missing portrait and Charlotte's inquiry reached Camilla. Already frayed by the 48-hour PR disaster of Diana's auctioned letters and the Sussexes' media games, Camilla's reaction was entirely disproportionate. What viewers of royal dynamics have noticed is that when Camilla feels her authority is questioned, her aristocratic facade cracks. She allegedly unleashed a wave of sharp reprimands aimed at the staff, demanding to know why a child's question was being entertained and asserting her absolute authority over the curation of the royal households. She demanded subservience. That is where the story changes. The moment Camilla's anger escalated, the Princess of Wales stepped into the room. This is where the devastating contrast of schadenfreude truly crystallizes. Camilla, holding the highest title in the land, was visibly losing her composure over a painting. Catherine, armed only with the title of princess, was a portrait of freezing aristocratic restraint. Catherine did not raise her voice. She did not engage in a messy, undignified shouting match. She killed with forensic administrative precision. Catherine understands the moral outrage of erasing Diana's legacy, but she also understands that you do not fight the Queen with emotion. You fight her with the institution. Without breaking eye contact with Camilla, Catherine calmly bypassed the Queen's authority entirely. She turned to the very staff members Camilla was berating and issued a quiet, singular directive: retrieve the portrait from storage and return it to its exact original position immediately. It was a breathtaking display of true power. Catherine did not ask for permission. She did not negotiate. She utilized the silent execution of revenge. By overriding Camilla's direct order in front of the palace staff, Catherine exposed the ultimate truth of the modern monarchy: Camilla may wear the crown, but Catherine is the mother of the future king. The staff, recognizing where the actual enduring power of the institution lies, moved immediately to obey the Princess of Wales. The visual humiliation for Camilla was absolute. As the portrait of Diana was brought out of the shadows and rehung on the wall, the trap snapped shut. Camilla realized in a wave of cold panic that her administrative trick had not only failed, but it had permanently shifted the internal power dynamic. Stripped of her illusion of absolute control, humiliated in front of the household staff, and effectively disciplined by her stepdaughter-in-law Camilla, was left with only one remaining card to play. She retreated to the one man who had spent 30 years protecting her. She went directly to King Charles, demanding that Catherine be officially reprimanded for insubordination and that her own supreme authority as queen be aggressively enforced. The entire future of the internal royal hierarchy hung in the balance, waiting for the king's response. When Camilla retreated to King Charles, expecting the full, undeniable weight of the sovereign to crush Catherine's insubordination, she encountered something far more terrifying than anger. She encountered a devastating silence. For 30 years, Charles had been her ultimate protector. He had fought his mother, his advisors, the British public, and his own children to force Camilla's acceptance into the royal fold. He had spent decades burning through his own political capital to shield her from the consequences of their history. Camilla fully expected that in this moment of acute humiliation, Charles would summon the Princess of Wales and deliver a crushing reprimand. She expected the king to remind Catherine that Camilla was the queen and that her word was absolute law within the private walls of the monarchy. But that is not what happened. What appears to be true, according to those familiar with the internal dynamics of the king's household, is that Charles simply refused to intervene. He did not yell, he did not defend his wife. He sat in the suffocating quiet of his study and did absolutely nothing. This was the psychological climax of Camilla's decades-long campaign for power, and it ended not with a bang, but with a cold realization. Charles is no longer the rebel Prince of Wales fighting for his mistreated lover. He is the king. And as the monarch, his primary duty is the survival of the crown. Charles knows with forensic clarity that William and Catherine are the absolute bedrock of the modern monarchy. They hold the public's affection, they generate the positive global press, and they represent the unbroken legitimate bloodline. To attack Catherine over a portrait of Diana would be an act of institutional suicide. Charles chose the survival of the institution over the fragility of his wife's ego. In that singular moment of silence, Camilla learned the hardest lesson of her royal life: the king will no longer save her from the Prince and Princess of Wales. To understand why Camilla could not simply override the king's silence and fire the staff who obeyed Catherine, we must unpack the cold, unyielding reality of royal finances. This is where the illusion of absolute power crashes headfirst into commercial desperation. Camilla acts as though she owns the palaces, the estates, and the vast wealth of the monarchy. She enjoys the private jets, the curated wardrobes, and the endless stream of servants. But the staggering truth is that Camilla owns virtually nothing. The true commercial power of the British monarchy, the liquid wealth and the sprawling real estate that funds their private existence belongs entirely to the Duchy of Cornwall. And the Duchy of Cornwall belongs exclusively, legally and permanently to Prince William. That detail matters immensely. It is the ultimate leverage in this silent war. William is not just the heir to the throne, he is the landlord. He owns the vast agricultural lands, the commercial properties and the financial portfolios that generate the family's private millions. Even King Charles's beloved private residence, Highgrove House, the very estate where he and Camilla cultivated their decades-long affair, is legally owned by the Duchy of Cornwall. King Charles literally has to pay rent to Prince William to live in his own favourite home. Camilla has no independent generational wealth that can compete with this staggeringly immense corporate structure. She has no constitutional claim to any of the sovereign properties. If Charles were to pass away tomorrow, Camilla would immediately become a dowager queen with zero biological connection to the new king, completely at the mercy of William's administrative goodwill. She would not own the roof over her head, the car she is driven in, or the payroll of the staff she commands. This financial and structural reality is why Catherine's quiet defiance was so devastatingly effective. Catherine did not need to scream because she knows that she and William hold all the actual capital. When Catherine ordered the portrait of Diana to be returned to its place, she was not just correcting a petty interior design choice. She was executing a flawless administrative strike. She was reminding the palace staff and Camilla herself of exactly who signs the checks and who represents the permanent future. The staff obeyed Catherine not just out of respect, but out of basic survival instinct. You do not align yourself with a temporary queen when the future king controls your pension. This was the silent, ruthless retaliation William and Catherine have perfected. They do not leak angry statements to the press. They do not give tell-all interviews complaining about their feelings. They simply use the massive quiet weight of the institution to crush any attempt to erase their mother's legacy. What viewers and royal analysts have noticed in the days following this internal crisis is a profound, subtle shift in the new order of the palace. The portrait of Diana remains exactly where Catherine demanded it be placed, serving as a permanent visual boundary that Camilla is no longer permitted to cross. But the consequences extend far beyond a single painting. There has been a noticeable change in the way protocol is being quietly weaponized to limit Camilla's reach. Reports suggest that access to certain private quarters and scheduling privileges, once freely dictated by Camilla's team, are now being double-checked and routed through William and Catherine's administrative offices. This is how the royal family wages war. It is not fought with shouting matches in the drawing room. It is fought with locked doors, revoked security clearances, and schedule conflicts that gently but firmly push the target toward the exit. This brings us to the deeper meaning of this entire crisis. Camilla spent 30 years carefully clawing her way to the very top of the British social hierarchy. She endured public hatred, she orchestrated a masterful public relations rehabilitation, and she successfully convinced Charles to place the highest crown in the land upon her head. She believed that reaching the summit meant she would finally be safe, that she could finally rewrite history and erase the spectre of Diana once and for all. But what this story seems to suggest is that the crown on Camilla's head is entirely hollow. She is surrounded by the trappings of unimaginable power, yet she is paralyzed by the commercial reality that she is merely a guest in William's empire. The ultimate tragedy for Camilla is that she played a 30-year game of chess, only to realize too late that William and Catherine owned the board. Catherine did not just restore a portrait, she restored the natural order of the monarchy. She demonstrated that uncomplaining sacrifice, fierce protection of bloodline, and forensic restraint will always outmaneuver unchecked ambition. Camilla is now trapped in a gilded cage of her own making, sitting next to a king who will no longer defend her, staring at a portrait of the woman she tried to erase, and living on an estate owned by the son of the woman she tormented. If you want to continue unpacking the silent warfare, the hidden administrative maneuvers, and the psychological power dynamics of the modern British monarchy, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We will continue to pull back the curtain on the illusions of power, one subtle detail at a time. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next analysis.